I'm Bob Keeling with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to Stay Safe Seminole. On today's program, we hope to spotlight some of the public safety issues that we have here in Seminole County, as well as our response to them. And we want to give you something of a behind-the-scenes look at some of the specialized resources that we have here to respond in times of emergencies like flooding and hurricanes, to respond both here in Seminole County and at times to help our neighbors elsewhere. Welcome to Stay Safe Seminole. Joining us now on Stay Safe Seminole is Seminole County Sheriff Dennis Lima. Sheriff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bob.
Now, when you give talks throughout the community, one of the biggest challenges that you talk about all of the time is the opioid crisis that we have happening across the country. And of course, Seminole County isn't immune from that either. Talk about some of the things that our department is doing to try to reverse the trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, so we've always experienced a high quality of life here in Seminole County, and we recognize that this growing trend of opioid addiction across the country. So what we've done is we've employed Narcan to all members of our organization, and actually have had more than 100 deployments in the past year. To really put this phenomenon into perspective, we can think about just the last 2 years here in Seminole County. There's been probably a 400% increase in overdoses, moving from 53 or so just 2 years ago to more than 200 this past year. We've also had a significant increase in overdose deaths. There's probably an 850% increase in that, starting from just a handful to more than 35. And our numbers here in Seminole County are actually lower than many of the contiguous areas. Just recently, we've recognized 32 deputy sheriffs in a past 6-month period for actually saving the lives, and we've had a 90% success rate anytime that we have deployed the Narcan, which is the intended to reverse the effects of opioid overdose. But with the heroin epidemic, a lot of it coming from Puerto Rico, and fentanyl being mixed because it's cheaper and has a quicker effect, we've seen this trend across the country and here in Seminole County as well.
And it's interesting, Sheriff, in talking to our deputies about Narcan, it is amazing how quick and effective and cost-effective it is as well.
Yeah, and it's just not the Sheriff's Office. All of our police partners are equipped with this. Our partners in public safety, both in the EMS and fire. One of the philosophies is to catch the drug dealers, and we've been doing that for 100 years or so. But there's also other steps that need to be taken to combat this epidemic. Education and awareness. It's actually very dangerous for people who come in contact with this, whether law enforcement or public safety. Just on the touch or smell can have very severe consequences for those who are around it.
And I think you bring up a good point. You have the first responders who are out there taking a significant risk to be selfless and to save those lives.
Absolutely. They're equipped, they're properly trained, and that continues to evolve. I mean, we have a specialized team that has been trained to train others in how to handle themselves. Another big part about this, and the governor has helped us out tremendously here in the state of Florida by offering just this past summer enhanced penalties for actually the drug dealers. And working with our wonderful state attorney, Phil Archer, we've successfully prosecuted 5 of these cases here in Seminole County, and we have another 5 or so that are in various stages of prosecution, waiting for information to come back from the medical examiner's office to determine what type of substance and the exact cause of death in some of these overdose cases. So We are aggressively enforcing the rules and going after the drug dealers and people who are involved in this, while at the same time we know that there's a direct correlation between drug activity and other crime and quality of life issues that occur in our communities. So this is really a holistic approach from education, awareness, enforcement, to make sure that our community remains the safest community anywhere in Central Florida.
So the takeaway from this is, if you are dealing this level of death and misery, then you had better beware, because you very well could end up facing a homicide charge.
You know, absolutely. Well, the fact is if you're dealing with it, you know, I'm not real big on the fear tactics and all that, but we're coming after you. I mean, we're coming after you with all that we have. We have a prosecution team that is fully behind us. We've got the relationships with our city police chiefs. We know that one of the greatest responsibilities we have is to protect our vulnerable and people who are addicted, and many of these individuals who end up addicted were one time legally prescribed this, whether they got caught up in the pill mill situation or they built up an addiction. But it's important for us to treat them. Human life is to be valued. We want to aggressively go after the drug dealers, put them away, put them in jail. When appropriate, charge them with homicide if others are dying as a result of what they've done. And you really come together with all stakeholders. That's the faith-based community, that's other nonprofits, as well as law enforcement.
So there are lots of resources being dedicated to trying to reverse this trend of the overdoses, but these are not easy solutions. This is a day-by-day process.
It absolutely is, and you know, everybody's involved in this process, because it does diminish quality of life when we have something this significant going on in our community. So, you know, we all come together and do what we can. You know, 800% increases in death and 400% increase in overdoses. Those are pretty significant numbers that we have to pay attention to. And again, we are not affected as much as some of our neighboring jurisdictions are.
And Sheriff, another topic that I know you're passionate about is getting school resource deputies into our schools. In fact, every single public school in Seminole County now has a school resource deputy to build those relationships, to provide security. But you'd like to see that program actually go a little bit further, if you could, possibly into private schools, into charter schools, perhaps. Talk about that.
Yeah, Bob. You know, we are so excited about the relationship that we have with the Seminole County School Board. And to my knowledge, we're first of the kind to outfit a dedicated deputy sheriff or police officer to every single public school campus in Seminole County. Not only have we done that, we've also, working with Walt Griffin, our superintendent of schools, we've put a dedicated captain who literally works in the same office as the superintendent. Traditionally, that was a position that was a school board employee, but they're there not just for school safety. Although as a father and as a citizen, it makes me feel more comfortable when I see a dedicated law enforcement officer on the campus. But we do it because they teach a focus on safety curriculum, which, you know, many people are familiar with the old DARE curriculum, which was Say No to Drugs. That had become dated. And the things that our children are exposed to now, the dating, the sexting, the texting, and all of these cyber-related activities, our deputies get on those campuses and teach that curriculum. You know, I had worked hard. My predecessor, Sheriff Esslinger, really made it a point to make protection of the children one of the top priorities we have here in Seminole County. And you know, we continue that, but not only do we have a dedicated law enforcement officer on every public school campus, we've also started to rotate and move into the charter schools as well. We have a dedicated law enforcement officer on at least one of our charter campuses, and we're rotating between several others. So this will expand in today's day and age. Any location that potentially would be a vulnerable location is something that we are responsible to protect. And if we're going to be there protecting it, we might as well take advantage of productive curriculums and all of these things to help foster positive working relationships with our children, faculty and staff as well.
Very good. Sheriff Dennis Lima, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Bob.
Turning now to emergency management, Aaron Funk heads up Seminole County's flood mitigation and recovery efforts. And Aaron, just in recent months, we've seen our share of water challenges. But let's talk first about just how susceptible is Seminole County to flooding, and are there particular regions that are more susceptible than others?
Right, so being a Central Florida county, obviously we are susceptible to flooding. We have a relatively flat geography here in the county. And obviously the St. Johns River, major river in Florida, actually a north flowing river, it does present issues with flooding, not only immediately the flooding after a storm, but it can be a continual slow rise of those rivers after a storm as well, which can cause a kind of continuing flooding issue. Obviously, depending on the intensity of a rainstorm event, any area of the county could potentially become, an issue as far as flooding. So it's definitely, an area in Central Florida, any areas particularly is going to be, susceptible to some type of flooding.
Okay, and we get a lot of new residents in every year, and let's say if I'm one of them, what is the best resource that I can go to figure out if I'm in a flood-prone area or if I'm in a specific flood zone? Where should I go to find that information?
Right, there's a few ways you can do that. One of the simplest and easiest ways to do it, and it's free, FEMA has a map service center. If you go to your search engine of choice and just type in FEMA's map service center, you can go there, type in your address, and it'll show your location or your potential location if you're looking to buy a residence in relation to the flood insurance rate map. So what flood zone you may be in, or if you're outside of the flood zone. That's a free resource. If you need assistance doing that, you can obviously call down to our building division. They can help you out with flood zone determinations. If you're looking to buy a home, you can do that as well. Seminole County's building division, give them a call, or you can email floods@seminolecountyfl.gov for information on that as well. So that's a good resource to check on that. If you're looking for a more definitive actual flood zone determination, if you're looking to buy a house, you do need that for flood insurance purposes. You definitely contact the building division.
And that's a good point to bring up, flood insurance. Right. It's obviously important to have, but are there some areas where if you live in a flood zone, you have to have it? In other words, are there some places if I live, I don't? But if I live in what has been determined to be a flood zone, I have to have that insurance. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that and what happens if you don't get that.
Right, so the National Flood Insurance Program, it's mandated that any federally backed loan service provider mandates flood insurance for anyone who has a mortgage through them. So if you're looking to buy a new home and you are going to have a mortgage on it and you do live in what's called a special flood hazard area, as determined by the flood insurance rate maps, then you are required to have flood insurance. We always encourage folks, if you do live in that, even if you don't have a mortgage, to buy flood insurance. It's definitely a good protective measure, especially if you're in or near a special flood hazard area, but you are required if you do have a federally backed mortgage lender.
Is there anything that's happening on the county level to try to mitigate or regulate the cost of flood insurance? Every little bit adds up.
Right, so the county is a participant in the community rating system, which falls under the National Flood Insurance Program, and it rewards any municipality or county, local jurisdiction, for the things that they do above and beyond the minimum standards of the NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program. And Seminole County does do quite a lot above the minimum standards. We have an adopted floodplain ordinance, and everything that is above and beyond the minimum standard we get credit for. So the hard work that's put in by all of the different agencies in the county in that, it does afford county residents who have flood insurance we're a Class 6 rating under the CRS program, and it affords a 20% discount on flood insurance for those folks who are living within the special flood hazard area, and a 10% discount for anyone who's living outside of the special flood hazard area who purchased flood insurance. Very good.
And of course, the big flood event that many of us remember from late last year, of course, was Hurricane Irma. And it presented some challenges. I know going down Jungle Road out by Lake Harney, it literally was underwater, and we were handing out sandbags. And is there a particular takeaway that the county had from that event that would be important to share in terms of what we learned and maybe what we do different going forward?
Right, obviously we're still assessing some of the impacts. Right now we're just getting into some of those areas as the water levels have receded to assess the impacts. Obviously this rainstorm event, we had Tropical Storm Faye, and previously that was in 2008. That was previously our worst rainstorm event. Most of county officials who were around for that event have, this is worse than that. We had a pretty extreme amount of rainfall with Hurricane Irma. Our stormwater systems did work properly, but with the St. Johns River, the way it flows, we had flooding initially from the extreme rainfall event, and then with the north flowing river, every amount of rainfall that was south of us, that all came up through the St. Johns River. So the areas that we typically have flooding issues with out in St. Johns, along Lake Jessup, and typically along the St. Johns River, we saw those issues again, and it is something that residents out there, they do need to be aware of. It's a flooding area. We encourage them obviously to have flood insurance, to do inquire about flood mitigation measures. That's obviously under flood insurance as well, under increased cost of compliance with flood insurance that can help with mitigation. There's also a variety of different mitigation grants through FEMA that may be eligible for residents out there to kind of help reduce the impacts in a future flood event.
And people are always surprised who aren't familiar with the St. Johns to find out that it's the only south to north flowing river in the northern hemisphere, and because of that you have a major rain event, but the flooding may not come at its worst for several days, even weeks into that. So that's good information. And Aaron Funk, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, great, thank you.
You bet. Another important resource we have here in Seminole County is Central Florida's Urban Search and Rescue Team. It's known as Task Force 4, and it responded to the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey last summer. And today, Seminole County Fire Chief Mark Oakes is here to talk a little bit about that really challenging assignment for the task force and the response that they gave our neighbors over in Texas. And Chief, first off, talk about how the task force is structured, and then more specifically how it was structured for that response in Texas.
Thank you for having me, Bob. Urban Search and Rescue Task Force 4 was created after 9/11 in 2001. The state of Florida determined a need for urban search and rescue statewide teams, and geographically they divided that up into 4 separate teams. So Central Florida was designated as Urban Search and Rescue Task Force 4. It's made up mostly of the 3 largest fire departments in Central Florida. That would be Orange County Fire Rescue, the City of Orlando Fire Department, and Seminole County Fire Department. And it provides over 120 members that belong to the Urban Search and Rescue Team. Somewhere in about 2009, the state determined a need after some recent flooding events that we needed a swift water rescue component. That was added, training to all the members, and that's how we were designated to go to Hurricane Harvey. It was through our swift water team.
Yeah, and boy, you want to talk about a rain event, even though it was months ago last year, and maybe it's faded from memory just a little bit, what an extraordinary rain event that was there in Texas. Talk about specifically, Chief, what the mission was there in Texas and how it evolved once the team got there.
So as all of us watched the situation develop, it was first a hurricane response. And the state of Texas has plenty of urban search and rescue teams, so they provided their own support. And then it became apparent that this was going to transition into a rain event also. And we're talking over 20 inches of rain in a lot of areas that were affected. 3 days later, mutual aid request was received by the state of Texas to Florida for swift water rescue teams. Hillsborough Urban Search and Rescue Team 3 and Central Florida Urban Search and Rescue Swift Water Rescue Team 4 was designated to go. The original mission was to Houston, Texas. En route, once they left the Panhandle and got in about Alabama, it transitioned. There was a need in the Beaumont area. So their original mission was to Houston, and then transitioned very quickly because of the need in Beaumont.
So, Chief, normally in a hurricane response, it's more about debris. It's about perhaps rescuing people from inside collapsed buildings. But this was more of a unique type case because it was just so water and flooding intensive, was it not?
Correct. And a very good point, Bob, because we have 3 large tractor trailers that have heavy equipment and heavy rescue equipment to extricate people from under rubble and debris for hurricanes. Then we also have a dive water rescue and several boats. So we did not take our normal cache of urban search and rescue heavy equipment. We just went with the equipment for swift water rescue, which is our boat and our dive equipment. And this was unique. We've done it in the state of Florida, but not to this magnitude, what the need was in Beaumont.
And then specifically, once you take all of that equipment there and you have this anticipation in your mind of how it's going to go for your team there, then you get on site and they are faced with some challenges to overcome. And Chief, I'm sure there were many.
There were many. Not only when we got in the area, we recognized the community need. They were just completely overwhelmed. They were relying on local resources and they could not keep up with the number of rescues. When we deployed like that, we had to be self-contained. That means we had to take our mobile kitchen, our mobile showers, because our people have to decon after being in those kind of events. Right. Not only that, our boats and our motors, you're talking about navigating through neighborhoods and streets. So a lot of times you're hitting street signs. They were in waters that were at the top of telephone poles. So they had to also look for wires and treetops and navigate through that. We ended up, both Task Force 3 and 4 destroyed motors and had to go find motors to replace on the boat.
Because they're hitting street signs and they're hitting things that would normally be up in the air, but because of the intensity of the rainfall, they're actually underwater.
There were places that they were in, communities that had over 20 feet of flood water.
That is stunning. That is absolutely stunning. And when we look back on that experience, it's also important to point out that you partnered with the military on this mission as well. What was that like?
Each deployment brings a whole different set of situations. This one, there was an amphibious rescue portion of the Marines that were allocated. And because we had a planning chief and we had all the infrastructure to plan and map out areas through GIS layers, we were a little bit more prepared than them. They had much more hardened equipment and had equipment that we could get into areas that we couldn't with our boats. So it made sense to marry them up both, and that relationship developed, and it provided the support and the needs of the equipment that they had to get us into areas with our training and our personnel. So, not always planned, but the assets were there. They got brought together and benefited the residents. And, we really didn't talk about this yet, but there were over 200 people rescued in just a 5-day mission.
That's amazing.
And over 100 animals and livestock. We're even talking horses.
That's great. And I would imagine with something like that, the way you've described it, with wires, with trees, with signs, this is a dangerous mission, not even mentioning the things that you might encounter in the water. Did we have any team members who were actually injured there?
Yes, we had one team member he was inside a house and doing a search and rescue mission and ended up sustaining. They wear dry suits, but even then sustained on a sharp object of lacerating his leg. 2 days later, they recognized because of the contaminants in the water, he developed a severe infection and had to be airlifted out of the flooded area.
Is he doing okay
He's
these days?
doing good. In fact, he stayed 3 days in the hospital. We flew him back to Orlando and we picked him up so he could be a part of the homecoming.
And Chief, after 200 rescues, after one unfortunate injury, which I'm glad was not worse, what an experience. And I would imagine it was a pretty warm homecoming for the team when they got back here to Central Florida.
Yeah, it was actually our PIOs from all the agencies, the 3 agencies, put together invitation for all the elected officials, the county manager's office out of Seminole and Orange, and the mayor's office out of the city of Orlando. Everybody attended, the families attended. We had tower trucks draping the United States flag, and we welcomed them as they arrived in with all their equipment, and it was very warming to see because it was over 1 week that a lot of our members were away from their families and work, so it was a very nice homecoming.
Right, and certainly all of the members performed vital roles, but one of them was actually the top dog out there.
Yeah, very proud of my Assistant Chief, Mike Johansmeyer. He was actually the incident commander that oversaw all the search and rescue operations and the deployment and the planning of the deployment.
Terrific. And when you have something like this, obviously it does not work for free. You know, these teams like this cost money, and is that one of the ongoing challenges we have here?
Right now, yeah, correct, Bob. Right now, it's the biggest challenge we face. The team was always funded by two sources: State Homeland Security Grant and the Urban Area Security Initiative, which was federally funded. Orlando in Central Florida had always been funded up till last year. And the very day that we lost our funding, we had to quickly move and ask for more state funding, and then also augment it with some of the resources locally to keep the team sustained with the equipment and training it requires.
Chief Mark Oakes, thank you so much for joining us on Stay Safe Seminole. Appreciate it. Thanks again to all our guests who provided us such valuable information on things like public safety, flood prevention, as well as some of the things we've done to respond in times of crisis, like last year's hurricane. I'm Bob Keeling with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. Thanks for watching.